Hi. I'd like to talk about the future of the OTD movement. I hope this video comes out because it seems a little shaky here. Okay, so what's the future? Okay, so my assessment revolves around the latest trends in the people among the people who have left, and the reaction from the Haredi sector to that latest trend. And I'm going to try to analyze that interplay between those two groups and to see how they are coming up with a new sort of understanding and a forum for the discussion of the central issues of Harediism in a modern world. Okay, so what we have here is like this. What we have here is in the last decade or so, actually it's less than a decade, in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been an intensification of the trend of people leaving ultra-Orthodoxy. And of course the numbers are still very low, but the percentage is going up. The rate is going up. The rate and the percentage, okay, meaning by the rate I mean the pace of people leaving. So you might have, let's say, 5% last year, and now you have maybe something like 5.5%. And of course, the absolute numbers and the percentage, it's all going up. So why are people leaving? Okay, so people are leaving Orthodoxy from a anecdotal, empirical sort of analysis. It seems to me that most of the people who are leaving are not leaving for ideological reasons. They are leaving rather for pragmatic purposes. So what do I mean by pragmatic purposes? What I mean by that is that something like, okay, let's enumerate. One is sexual orientation. Okay, they are gay or lesbian or transsexual. Okay, I'm even aware of someone transsexual who has left Orthodoxy, ultra-Orthodoxy. So that's one. Of course, obviously in Haredi Judaism, that's not accepted. Of course, it's against the Torah, and so they would never tolerate that. Okay, so that's one reason. Two, abuse. And this is actually, there's two prongs to this. There's physical abuse. It's still quite common for people, Generation X and Generation Y, to be growing up in a household where the father is, unleashes a serious dosage of corporal punishment in response to various rather trivial kind of offenses. But what the average American would be considering trivial. And the question of whether it's a religious offense or not isn't really relevant here. They're just over punishing their children. And so physical abuse and, of course, sexual abuse. So sexual abuse could be in the form of a family member. In extreme cases, it's even like a parent. And it could also be a member of the community. So people leave due to that, especially if they don't get redress from within the community. So it's very humiliating to be sexually abused, and then when you try to bring it up with a leader or influential person in the community, they dismiss your grievance. So that's number two, physical or sexual abuse. Number three is a little hard to quantify, but I think it's like what I would call malaise. Okay, so there are people who grow up in the community and they feel like this sense of unease, that there's something wrong, there's something just not right. And so this is not ideology. So what is happening here is that they feel like they don't belong. They feel like they don't share the values, and they feel like they'll be happier outside. Okay, so basically, this is, like I said, it's malaise, because you can't pinpoint it. You can't quantify exactly what the problem is. But I think if you do really want to, if you're going to mine this person and to try to draw out what really is bothering them, I think what it will boil down to is that they want a better prospects for making a living. Okay, so they want better jobs, better occupation, a more fulfilling occupation. So they feel like the Haredi setting is really, what's the expression? Crimping their stride, right? Is that how it goes? Okay, something like that. So it's really hobbling them in terms of making progress occupationally and career-wise and economically. So that's basically what the third element is. So what else is there? Let me see. From the people that I know who have left. Of course, I mean, obviously nowadays there's the internet. Okay, so which brings me to a new dimension, which is, okay, the internet. Saying that somebody left because of certain information that they access over the internet is actually doesn't fall into this scheme that I'm trying to create here of why people leave, because the internet is a medium. It's not a reason why you left. So what I mean by that is that the internet gives you access to a wide array of information, some of which is critical or undermines the Haredi mores. And so as a result of that, sometimes the structure falls apart, you don't revere your religion anymore, and so you leave. But that's not actually the reason you leave. Okay, there's an important point to make. You don't leave because of the internet. You leave because there's other issues, and the internet shows you that you have alternatives, that you have options. Okay, so so the internet is an enabler. It's not the reason you leave. This is a very, very important point that I want to make, which brings me to the other point, which is that most of the people, in my assessment, I would say that 95% of the people who leave do not leave for ideological reasons. And this is very disturbing to me, very unsettling, because me personally, I left for ideological reasons. And many people who I've met over the years, they refuse to believe me, or they completely don't get it, that I had no issues whatsoever which prompted me to leave. So it wasn't physical abuse, sexual abuse, I wasn't a good student, I didn't have good prospects for marriage, it wasn't that I was concerned about not being able to make a living. In fact, didn't even enter into the equation at all, because I was just expected, my values were so Torah driven that it didn't even enter my mind. So none of these things played a role. And the only reason I left is because I was a very philosophical person. And for me, Judaism had to be explained. It had to be rationalized. There had to be a reason behind it. And when I couldn't find that reason, and I started digging deeper and deeper, and the system incriminated itself. And so basically, it imploded from within. Okay, the evidence of contradictions and inconsistency and just circular reasoning and all these other flaws that I encountered, it was just overwhelming. And since I was so driven to pursue the truth, so this very drive instilled in me by the Haredi system ultimately proved to be the biggest force against itself. Which actually, looking back, it's a little ironic, because why pursue the truth? Who cares? I mean, just be happy. So if I had to replay the whole thing, and if I had a choice, I would say maybe this whole premise, that the whole Haredi premise that the truth and God is so important, maybe that itself is flawed. But at any rate, that's something that has guided me over the years through my transition and beyond. This notion that I need to pursue the truth, I need to find the perfect way of living, and so this is essentially the driving force behind me leaving. And so why is this unfortunate? I mean, obviously it's unfortunate for me because it's difficult for me to find common ground with other people who leave. So selfishly, I say that it's regrettable, but it's regrettable for another reason as well. It's regrettable because and this brings me to the real point of this discussion that I'm having here, is that there's a certain dialogue between the people who have left and the people who remain behind. Okay, unlike in the 1970s, when there was basically this invisible iron curtain between the Haredi sector and those who chose not to live a Haredi lifestyle after the war. So it could be either because they arrived before the war, or maybe they just had a different came from different towns and different backgrounds and different conclusions based on the Holocaust and other things that they endured. And so for some people, and some of them didn't leave completely, they just modernized. They became like modern Orthodox or something like that. But regardless, those who chose not to live a Haredi lifestyle, that was basically declaring themselves, I should say, those who did choose to live a Haredi lifestyle declared themselves apart from any other American who chose by default to just be practical and go with the flow. All right. So like I said, so there was no social interaction between the two groups. Whereas in recent years, in the 90s and beyond, now there's much more interaction between the groups. So now you have the people who leave are not really leaving, and I mean I should actually elaborate on this even more. But essentially there's two elements to this. Number one is that they are still interested in their community. They still want to remain part of the narrative. They want to know what's happening, and they want to give their feedback with respect to what's happening. And their voice, which brings me to the other thing, which is that their voices are actually being heard. So the people in the community take that into account. Okay, so it's not like in the past where we don't care what anyone else views, what anyone else thinks about us, because we have our own value system and we're superior and we know what we're doing. It's just the tradition, and it's based on the word of God and the edict of the rabbis, and so nowadays the Haredi community doesn't have this attitude anymore that the tradition is self-sufficient. So nowadays they're a little more self-critical, and especially when it comes from people who grew up in a very similar background to them, and they chose not to abide by such practices. And so it begs the question: okay, so why do they not want to, accept those strictures that if we accept? And so people are curious in the Haredi system. They're curious about this, and this is why there is this dialogue. And this is something that the Haredi system has not been successful in stemming. Okay, they couldn't really keep them out, and in part because of the internet. Okay, because of the internet, that's why this dialogue still happens online, and you can't really stanch this flow. And so what's my point here about ideology? So the reason it's so regrettable that most people don't leave because of ideology is because at some point I had predicted that there's going to be this mass movement away from ultra-orthodoxy in the years to come. And sadly, I have to say that upon further analysis, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And the reason being is that most of the rhetoric that you'll find on the part of the people who are leaving is not ideology driven. So there isn't enough of a force to uproot them from their comfort zone, to uproot those who remain behind from their comfort zone. So the only reason, if you look at history, the people who have been forced to innovate are the ones who were under distress. They were the ones who were kicked out, who were expelled from their natural environment, and they were forced to seek out other modes of living, and they were forced to innovate. Okay, the Greeks, for example, case in point, right? They just didn't live in a terrain that was very hospitable, that was very agriculture suitable, and so they were forced to explore the seamanship and to make that a trade. Okay, use that for self-sustenance. And so ultimately, this, over the years, this has proven to be a superior form of sustenance than the traditional agriculture, which only focuses on your own resources. Okay, so this is just an example of how some people are driven to greater success through distress. Okay, so my point is like this. So my point is that that right now we don't have a mass movement, and because there isn't enough of a moral force for it. And the reason there's a moral force is because the representatives of the movement are not interested in providing a moral force for leading, because their goal is to simply, to them it's like a sport. To them it's like, yeah, they like to mock, a lot of mockery, okay, mocking the Haredi system, jokes, and showing off. Hey, I'm cool, and I'm successful, and I'm prosperous, and the response from the Haredi system is, hey, you're not successful. You don't have a girlfriend, you're not married, you don't have a family, you don't have a good job, blah, blah, blah. And so that's basically what the discussion revolves around. It revolves around who is cool. Okay, who is cool and who is prosperous? Is it me or you? And the criteria for that prosperity, how do you define prosperity, is material success. Okay, meaning a family, a career, a job, etc., etc. The thing that doesn't come into play here is the actual reason, the raison d'etre for this system itself. Why do we keep these laws? Why do we observe the Sabbath? Why do we keep kosher? And why do we dress like this? And why don't we have a good educational system in our school system? Okay, so those questions do not play an important role. And of course, I have a good friend of mine, Nick Moster, for example, who is a very prominent advocate of better education, and he has founded a group called Yafed, and I'm very supportive of this. But like I said, there is very little support from the OTD community at large for his effort. And why is that? Well, for one, because they're very, and this is a separate discussion I should be having, which is that it's very fiercely individualistic, very competitive, the OTD community. You know, it's nominally a community, but it's not really a community. But anyway, I don't want to get into that because it's a completely separate discussion. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is very few people who are actually pursuing this agenda of substantive change, like really trying to tackle, really addressing the real issues of what the problem in the community is, and trying to create a better world and show people in the community that there are other alternatives which are more sustainable, more logical, and more advisable. Okay, so like in fact, for example, the group that I am, the Footsteps, which is a famous forum and vehicle for people seeking to leave, famously has this non-proselytizing rule. So they themselves don't proselytize. Okay, so you will never, if you go to Footsteps and you're asking them for advice, should I leave or should I not, they will never tell you, never advise you, yes, you should leave. And they don't want their own members to try to engage in these kind of conversations. They want them to like, just take it easy and just don't try to impose your view on other people. Don't be too forceful in imposing your view. And of course, to some extent, this is a legitimate policy, right? Like you don't want to. People in the community are accustomed. People in the Haredi community are accustomed to this forceful imposition of your opinion on others, like very argumentative. And so now that you're in the open world, so be more tactful about this. Okay, so to some extent this is a reasonable policy, but the problem with this approach is that they're not, the Haredi community is very passionate and very committed to their cause. And they are very self-righteous about it. They know, I have the truth. And only I have the truth. There's only one way to satisfy God, and that is by keeping all the commandments. And so why are we such wusses compared to the Haredi sector. Like, why are we? Oh, okay, there's several ways of doing things. You can either be religious or you cannot. It doesn't work for me. It works for you. It doesn't work for me. Now, of course, like it's a very nice and diplomatic thing to say, but it's not really true. Okay. Like, of course, if you're a politician running for office, that's what you should be saying, right? You shouldn't be alienating the Haredi sector for no reason, right? So don't tell them, hey, your lifestyle is ridiculous. But the reality is, between me and you, that yes, their lifestyle is ridiculous. Okay, they are restricting themselves from whole entire activities and occupations and modes of thinking and operating and all that for no rational reason. The only reason they do that is because this is what our parents did, and their parents, etc., etc. And I'm afraid of thinking outside the box. So if you watch the movie Croods, then you know what I mean. Okay, so as the motto in that movie goes, never not be afraid. Okay, so that's how the Haredi community approaches this. Okay, never not be afraid. Always be afraid that if you change something, then it's going to be a catastrophe. So anyways, I've been talking here for 21 minutes. So what I want you to take away from this whole discussion is that there isn't going to be any change, any mass movement here away from ultra-orthodoxy in the years to come. Regrettably, and I think the reason for that is that there isn't enough people who are advocating change for change's sake. Okay, so the ones who are advocating change are just simply saying, yes, it's an option. Yeah, and I'm actually gonna So to further cite as an example, there has been a campaign by some prominent members of the OTD movement. I think it's Samuel Katz and was it what's her name? Leah Vincent, I believe. They spearheaded this project. So it's called "It Gets Better." And so one of the slogans they came up with is we don't say, we're not saying you could. Okay, I take that back. We're not saying you should. We're not saying you would. We're saying that you could. Okay, so you could live a different lifestyle. So we're not telling you you should do it. Of course, we're not going to tell you that you would. We don't know what you would do, but we're telling you that you could do it. And so this is an interesting slogan, which, on the one hand, it's very true, right? Just show them that it's a possibility, it's an alternative. And this, I mean, of course, this is true. Okay, growing up in the Haredi world, sometimes they don't think that there's actually a possibility to live a different lifestyle. So, in that respect, this is a useful way of viewing things. But ultimately, is this really what's at stake here? Whether you could or you couldn't? I mean, that's not really the question whether you could. The real question is, should you do it, right? The real question is, should I content myself with such a lifestyle? Okay? And when I say I should, I don't mean like you have a moral duty of striving for something beyond. That's not what I'm saying, really, because I don't really care what... I mean, I wouldn't try to necessarily go to great lengths to try to persuade you to adopt a moral duty that doesn't really affect me, right? But for yourself, don't you want a better life for yourself? Okay, what are your values? So that's ultimately the question. And so it's not really a question of you could, it's really a question of what should you do for your own best interest. Okay? And so this is why I think that it's actually, to some extent, depending on your angle of how you approach this, it could actually give someone the wrong message, okay? Because it's more than a possibility, it's something that you should want to do. Okay, so this is, so I'm going to leave it at this.